of observation, tests and treatment. But the professional rugby field is unlike any other walk of life. Indeed, brain injuries, or concussions as they're also labelled, have become such routine occurrences, many involved chose to shrug or laugh them off as simply a ding, having my bell rung, or a head knock. Well, if you don't laugh. Gradually, after several minutes, Smith was raised from his stupor and helped gingerly from the field by medics, his left leg trailing alarmingly behind him as the motor function of his brain struggled to control the rest of his body. After coming out of 4 years of international retirement to help his already injury-stricken national team, this was not how it was supposed to end for one of Australia's greatest sporting warriors. "I'd be very surprised if George Smith comes back on the field," said the Fox Sport commentator, witnessing the evidence in front of him. His co-commentator agreed. "He can hardly stand up, hardly walk. He's going to be a very sore man tomorrow." Sore man is rugby speak for likely to be unable to get out of bed, turn on the lights, or walk to the local shop. To put it more bluntly, sore man meant he was utterly fucked. Even in a sport where playing on after suffering a concussion had become increasingly normalised, revered as an act of bravery and sacrifice on behalf of the team, by 2013 concern about the long-term risks had prompted a few to call for change. And this one was so bad many assumed Smith would stay off. I didn't for a second, and leant across to my colleague in the press box and said, "He'll be back." And so he was. 5 minutes later, the 32-year-old trotted gingerly out onto the field again and carried on playing. "That's a massive call," said the commentator. "That's a massive call for George Smith's life," he may as well have said. The Smith case did not happen in isolation. Far from it. Since I'd begun covering rugby union professionally 10 years previously, and in the 20 years before that when I'd played it, I'd witnessed a sport transformed. From an amateur contact sport played by physically fit, strong and brave young people, rugby had morphed into an extreme version of its former self, with players now bigger, stronger and more physically committed than at any point in its 150-year history. The physical consequences for players were becoming increasingly evident. As money had poured in since the game went professional in 1995, rugby union's injury profile had shot through the roof to a point where I believed, as someone who loved the game to its core, it had become unsustainable, intolerably dangerous, reckless even. Doctors now compared injuries suffered on a professional rugby field to those normally witnessed in road traffic accidents. Biceps and hamstrings torn off the bone, knees obliterated, collarbones crushed, brains battered. As collisions got bigger and more frequent, so too, of course, did concussions. Everyone knew the sport was far more dangerous than ever before, and I mean everyone. The players, the doctors, the coaches and the media. We all knew it. Even the administrators and advertising folk, many of whom had never laced a pair of boots in their lives. In some people's eyes, rugby had become beautifully brutal. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder. As the collisions increased and head injuries got worse, so too did the pressure to get players fit and back on the pitch faster than ever. Previously accepted medical norms were dispensed with, unthought of treatments practiced, untold pain managed. And training was sometimes worse than match days as players vied against each other for contracts and coaches made it up as they went along. Worse still, the more players suffered concussions, the more they were returned to the field by compliant medical staff, often directed by coaches who cared little for tomorrow. Get up, get going, and go again. Bodies and brains were being damaged in the long term, I had no doubt, and as stories began to emerge of former American footballers dying prematurely, sometimes choosing suicide over living with the depression, anxiety, and violent mood swings associated with the effects of repeated blows to the head, I became increasingly convinced rugby's authorities were doing irreparable damage to a generation of young professional players. And while everyone knew rugby had outgrown itself, few were prepared to say so in public. Silence pervaded. A dangerous omerta we all accepted. Somehow rugby union convinced itself to turn a blind eye to the increasing damage being inflicted on a cohort of young athletes who knew no better and were not being protected from themselves. The data the corporate doctors presented in defence of the sport told us there was nothing to see and to look the other way. I refused. And when I spoke to the players and their families away from the cameras and followed their injury stories,